Okay, now, people will say, okay, the reason this building fell is because of the massive impulse forces. I've heard that from one or two people. Not just one or two, in fact, it is the mainstream debunker's idea of what's going on in this building. The problem is that it violates Newton's third law. If you have a massive impulse, Newton's third law says, it doesn't really matter because I can remember it. It says equal, opposite, and collinear. All impulse forces are equal, opposite, and collinear. What that means is that if you've got a force in one direction, then you've also got a force in another direction. Gravity is not an impulse force. So if you have two halves of an orange falling through space towards Earth, then what you'll find is that there is actually, because they're accelerating at the same speed, and because their acceleration relative to each other is zero, because they're both accelerating at the same speed, there is in fact no impulse force between them. So of course, when you've got the gravity, gravity acting on these two parts of the orange, there is ultimately no impulse and reaction there. They are all being accelerated at whatever gravity is doing, pulling it towards whatever planet it's going towards. So people regularly confuse the two ideas, which are people regularly confuse the two ideas of impulse and gravity, and people will say, well, there's a massive amount of building above. But ultimately, the second you say there's a massive amount of building, what you have to do is you have to say, how is that massive amount of building doing damage to the other part of the building? And if it's doing damage, then it must be decelerating. And there is no deceleration. This is free fall speed. And that is the essence of why the debunking of the mainstream argument for 9/11 truth, which is the collapse of World Trade Center 7's free fall speed, is missed by people who claim to be skeptics. You cannot be a skeptic and then fail to apply Newton's third law to a building collapse. It's simply mutually exclusive. So I would say there's an awful lot of pseudo-skeptics around who actually believe they are scientists and believe they engage in critical thinking. But when it comes to something politically inconvenient, it conveniently ends. Okay. Now he's granted me another 5 minutes. I'll just show you briefly what WeAreChange looks like, which is as I understand, it's a French method of bringing a building down. Are we going to get it straight away? Yeah. What they do with these is they take the middle of the building out, and when they take the middle of the building out, the top half falls down on the bottom half, which is what mainstream truthers allege is going on in the first one. But if you watch closely, you'll see that the building actually decelerates as it goes down. It's visible. You don't have to look hard. You can actually see it becoming slower as it goes through the bottom half of the building. And that's with the middle 2 or 3 floors taken out. That's a common, well, it's not common. It's used by companies that don't want to use explosives as much because it means that they don't have to handle explosives.
What was the term for it?
WeAreChange.
WeAreChange.
Perhaps anyone knows the pronunciation. I think I'm saying it like an English person would say it. V-E-R.
As long as I use the same word as you.
Very nice. Right, now, even NIST has admitted that the 8 of these stories fell at freefall. But if you, and this is something that the Truth Movement, I discovered this 3 days ago, in fact. The Truth Movement as a whole, there is a group called the Truth Movement, large, broad group, has missed the fact that during one of their technical briefings, and I'll be showing you this later because I want to move on as quickly as I can. During one of their technical briefings, they actually, Cheyenne Sunder, lead investigator for NIST, which is the government agency tasked with investigating the World Trade Center collapse, actually admitted that 17 stories fell at free fall speed. But I'm not going to, he didn't admit it word for word, he said that 17 stories fell at 3.9 seconds, which is what he recognises to be free fall speed. So even NIST, in its final, but then retracted it later in the final report, which says that 8 stories fell at free fall speed. So even NIST, the government agency, recognises the free fall. And debunkers will turn around and say, okay, you've taken that out of context. Here's the paragraph that you're quoting from, and here's point 1, here's point 2, here's point 3. And point 1 is slow descent with the acceleration of less than that of gravity, that corresponded to the buckling of the exterior columns and lower floors. In my opinion, and if you look at the videos for yourself, you can confirm that that is false. There is no period of deceleration, as you saw from the graph that I was showing before. There is no period of deceleration beyond even the 10th of a second. I think you could possibly say that the 10th of a second where you started. There is almost no period of slow acceleration there that confirms what they've said there. And number 3, which is their point, which is number 1 is the slow period of acceleration, number 2 is the free fall that they admit, and number 3 is a deceleration period as the north face encounters the distance from the structure below. Eventually, everybody on both sides should be agreeing that ultimately, as the building collapses enough, then there is deceleration further down. Everybody should be agreeing that. But for 17 stories measurably and 8 stories admitted by NIST, there is free fall. And irrespective of what happens before or after that, that means that for 7 or 17 stories, sorry, I'm getting the numbers of stories confused. For 8 or 17 stories, whichever person you believe, the truth movement and your own eyes, or NIST, is whichever period you're talking about. For those 8 or 17, there was no resistance from the structure. Okay, now I think I've said enough on freefall, and I'm looking to get into the debate on that. I did have some other points that I wanted to make, but things are going so much faster than I realised. So I'm going to move on to the second point that I wanted to make, which is explosions. And in the reports produced by NIST and the 9/11 Commission before that, which were horribly fixed, and there's a massive amount of evidence to demonstrate that specifically and exclusively the 9/11 Commission was corrupt beyond belief. They even had Henry Kissinger appointed to lead it as the initial leader of it. The number of horrifically corrupt, politically corrupt things involved with the 9/11 Commission is quite phenomenal. And you can see family members on video exploding and describing their rage and how they were treated by the 9/11 Commission. They were being polite to Condi Rice is something that one of them said about how offended he was at the play they were taking with Condi Rice, at the way they were being friendly with Condi Rice rather than trying to ask her difficult questions and try and get to what actually happened on the days. But anyway, both of those, the 9/11 Commission report, I can't remember if explosions are actually mentioned anywhere in this report, but the 9/11 Commission report doesn't mention explosions, or, believe it or not, World Trade Center 7, anywhere in it. It's completely excluded, as are dozens of eyewitness testimonies. I'm going to give you a few of those eyewitness testimonies now. You've seen a few on the internet, but you're going to see a few of the best ones now. And by the best ones, you can say I'm cherry picking. But to say I'm cherry picking, what you have to do is you have to demonstrate on the other side that the people that I've shown are not representative of the whole group. The people I'm showing here are either representative of the whole group, in other words, they all say something very similar to what the person I'm quoting says, or they mostly say it, the vast majority of them. So it's either they all or mostly. I'll tell you when it's all and I'll tell you when it's mostly. And further, I want to make it clear that if I've excluded context, it's because it's irrelevant, not because I'm trying to hide it. And the only way you'll be able to verify what I've excluded in context is by researching it yourself. You cannot know that I'm telling the truth just by listening to me. You have to go and look. You have to go and look afterwards for yourself to see if I've excluded anything relevant. Okay? And you have to think critically about what's relevant. For example, like the example I gave you before with the three sections, the third section is agreed by everybody and is irrelevant. Anyway, so I'm going to give some of the best examples of this. But first, I want you to see the explosions. I don't want you to have to think that I'm just quoting others who said something that doesn't correlate with the physical reality. Because after all, science and skeptics are about observations, supposedly. This is, if I can get to the right part of it. Don't want to spend too much of your time looking at this. This is the North Tower exploding. And the reason I say exploding, and the reason David Chandler says exploding, and I highly recommend David Chandler for a clean and critical analysis of 9/11. The reason I say exploding, and the reason David Chandler says exploding, is because it's difficult to find any other words that will describe what you're seeing there. I think I could show a 7-year-old this, and he would say it's an explosion, just from having seen explosions on the A-Team on TV or whatever it is they watch nowadays. I don't have a TV. Let me think. That is the North Tower exploding. I don't think it's difficult for anybody to look at that and say that's an explosion. In fact, not just an explosion, very, very many explosions. Okay, you're about to see David Chandler, who measures the acceleration of the downward destruction of the North Tower. The top, he measures the top of the building and how it accelerates downwards. The first one is free fall acceleration, the red one. I think the red one is free fall acceleration, or is it the blue one? No, the blue one's the free fall acceleration. The red one is the acceleration as measured from different angles to actually demonstrate that is the acceleration. You can't properly see it from that angle, but he's done it on another video, and I recommend that video highly too. But this video, you can see, well, the point that David's making here, and the point that I'm making, because it's such a compelling point that it's worth reproducing. The point David's making here is what you'll see about this level here. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing with the mouse there. But that point there, when you see it in a second, you will see that the explosions are actually moving the same speed as the red line. Can you see the explosions coming out at the same speed as the red line? It might be a bit grainy, it might be a bit difficult to see from where you're sat, but you can actually see, and you can go and verify this for yourself, that the explosions there are moving at the same speed as the red line. So that makes them the fastest thing internally, and it means they're propagating internally inside the building as fast as anything else is going on. That means that all this warping of steel, because when you listen to debunkers, what you'll hear is you'll hear them talking about that warp, collapsing, gathering momentum, collapsing floors and warping of steel. All that warping of steel is going on faster and pushing out air faster than anything else in the building. It's not taking time for those to come out, and it's also pushing air out quicker than the air is. It's also pushing air out more quickly at the base than it is at places which are already failed further up. I'm not expressing myself particularly clearly there. I'm not pleased with that, but you can see here clearly the amount of debris being thrown out sideways. And some of these have been clocked at 70, 80 miles an hour, and we're talking about 4-ton steel framed sections of building here. Okay, so I don't think that's heard.
Just about, yeah. Just about.
No, it's not. It's not on there. It's on here. It's on here.
On the YouTube video.
Well, we're going to have to live with that, I'm afraid. I did want you to hear it better. Notice his phrase is not looking well.
Alright, take one and two, one. This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the two towers. Debris continues to fall and to rain on the people below. There are people hanging from the windows 90 stories up, and a number of bodies have actually hit the pavement. Another one? Take two. Take two and two, one. This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Notice his phrase is not look at those buildings collapsing down, look at them gathering pace. It's nothing like that. It's a huge explosion now, raining debris now on all of us. That's what he says. We'd better get out of the way, and then they'll start pelting away. Now, he's no professional. He's not an experienced building engineer of any sort. He's not a physics professor. But that's just simply instinct. And not only is it instinct, you can actually, because the camera looks up, because the camera flicks up, you can see it. You can see for yourself, which is observation, which is the scientific side of things, rather than the instinct that we're hearing from him. You can see that the building is actually undergoing a huge explosion. You can see the sides of the building erupting out. That is this. I do mean erupting, because one of the phrases that's used is pulverization. Pulverization is what happens to the concrete, and all of the concrete was pulverized to a fine dust, and people were pulverized to fine dust. There were no complete floor sections found pancaked at the bottom. What you'll hear people say is pancaked. When you look at the bottom, you will find no such pancakes.